28:10. Before that, I want to talk about books. I used to read a lot when I was younger. I was really into like science fiction books, more of the fantasy type. So I like knights, princesses and kingdoms, and I like magicians, right? So like King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, like all of that stuff. I loved it. I loved Greek mythology. But there's this one series of books that I read. It's by this author his name is David Eddings. And there are this family of magicians or sorcerers in the book. And he explained how they did their magic. And the way that they did their magic was this thing called the will and the word, right? And basically, when they would train each other to do magic, they're you have to really, believe what you're going to do. And then you just say a word, right? And when you say the word, and if you have, you gather all your will and you put all of it into this word, it will happen, right? So they'll be burn, and something will burn, right? And they'll be wind or something, and wind would happen, right? Or all this stuff. And I would read that, and I was is that kind of how our faith is supposed to work? I remember reading passages in the Bible where it says, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can move mountains. You can say to this mountain, go from here into here, and it will, and it will move. And I remember thinking, I was oh, is that how faith is? And I used to do stuff. I wouldn't be so bold to try and move mountains, but I would and it's very much I don't know if you ever watch Heroes, you see these superheroes trying to figure out their powers. And I would sit there with a pencil, on the ground, and I'd be I believe you will move, right? Is that how faith, isn't this how faith is supposed to work? You just believe in it hard enough and it's going to happen, right? And I would do things like that. I would test things, and then if it didn't happen, I'd be oh, maybe I didn't have enough faith, right, that it would happen, And I was okay, I gotta gather more faith. And I'm trying to squeeze out all doubt, right, from my mind, and be move, or a cup of water, boil, or you know what I mean, or heat up, or I'm driving and I'm running low on gas. I'm fill, the gas tank, and it didn't work like that, and I was well, I don't understand then, how is faith supposed to work? Are we just gathering up all of our belief and just throwing it at something and expecting by the power of our will that it will happen? Is that what faith is? In this passage that we're talking about, talks a lot about faith. It talks a lot about how God interacts with faith. It talks about where it comes from, the type of faith, whose faith it is, and it takes a little bit of looking to pull it out, but I want to encourage us, and I think what today we're going to have as we go through this passage is lessons of just about faith. It's not all encompassing, but there are certain really kind of profound things I think in this passage that it talks about faith. If you have your Bibles, if you could open up to Acts 27. Let me give you a reminder of where we're at in the journey. Paul is on his way to Rome. Now, they're in these old kind of boats that can't handle open sea travel. And so they've been going from, port to port, right? And they're falling behind. It's getting cold. It's getting towards the winter time. And Paul tells them, when they get to Crete, Fairhaven's over here, he says, guys, we shouldn't continue, we're gonna get in trouble. It's the weather's not good, everything. They don't listen to Paul, and they try to get to Phoenix, but then a huge storm comes, a long storm, and they get blown off course. And they get blown straight into the middle of the ocean, or into the middle of the sea, sorry, not the ocean. And, and they don't expect to live, right? And at some point, Paul gets this reminder from God. And it's kind of the first statement of faith. It's before, the passage that we're going to read through today, but let me read it to us, starting from 22, actually 21, I'll say this. This is what Paul starts off. They've been in the sea for a little while. For more than a little while. It's been a constant storm. They have not seen moonlight or sunlight for days. It says that since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God whom I belong to and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" That's kind of Paul's first statement of faith. I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to just read what happens, and we're going to take a look back at it. Okay? So he says this statement to them after a few days, probably like another week, a week and a half pass, and it keeps on going, and that's where we pick up in verse 27. It says this: "On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending that they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away." This boat, let me just explain. First of all, this boat, the way that Paul ended up on the boat is Paul is being transported as a prisoner with some other prisoners to get to Rome for trial. So the centurion is in charge of them, and what they do is they kind of commandeer a boat that is already a trade boat that is already on its way over to Rome. And so on this boat there are a mixture of people. There are these sailors, merchant sailors, there are the centurions, the soldiers, and then there's the prisoners. And the sailors don't really have that much to do with the soldiers, but it's just Roman law. They have to do what they're told, right? And so they have to transport them. And so the sailors, they start looking out for themselves at this point. They're like, uh-oh, the ship is going to go. We could drop a lifeboat, probably get ourselves to shore, and hopefully be safe. But if they go, nobody else can handle the ship, right? Then it's just like the soldiers and the prisoners. So just to explain that, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. "For the last 14 days you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head." And he said this. He took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of all of them. Then he broke it and began to eat. Actually, I have this on. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there are 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. They hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach, but the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. So the bow is the front of the ship. It hits, a high sandbar that's underneath the water they couldn't see, and it gets stuck. But the storm is still going on. It's not just like, we see land and it's like a bright sunny day. Like the storm is still going on, and so the waves are pushing against the stern, which is the back of the boat, and just breaking it, like piece by piece. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, a chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. When Paul went in to see him, and after prayer placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. First thing that I want to talk to us about faith is that faith is not in an outcome in this story, in this account. Christian faith is in God. The first statement that Paul says before this all happens, he says, "So take heart, men, for I have faith in God, that it will be exactly as I have been told." Right? The faith is not just, like, oh, okay, I believe, that by the power of my will or my trust in something happening that it is going to happen. It is by faith in a being, right? It is faith in this almighty being, in the person of God, that is supposed to be the object of our faith. Faith starts off, it's always in God. It's never in particular results. We get led astray when we start placing our faith in outcomes versus the being who controls the outcomes. When we place faith in what we think is or we want to happen versus we place faith in God who is designating what is happening. And sometimes God will tell you when something is going to happen, and we place faith in God for those things. But in other times, it is simply we place faith in a being. Second point I want to make is that faith in God can even cover the people around us who do not have faith in God. Paul and Luke are probably two of the only Christians on this ship. Paul starts off, right? He warns them at the very beginning. And he says, "Guys, I don't think we should sail." And they have no faith in Paul, right? They're like, "No, we're going to keep going." The captain says, "We're going to keep going." As things change, as Paul testifies, he's like, "Hey guys, this is the God who I serve," right? He says, "I believe, this God who I serve has told me this, and so I'm going to have, and this is my faith. And this is the trust that I have put in, that I have in our God, in my God, for you." And it is Paul's faith, I would say, that initially carries them. There's this passage in Luke 5:17-20 where Jesus is at a town and he's healing people. He's healing sick people. And so there are these friends that, they have there are 4 friends, and they have a 5th friend who is paralyzed, and so he's on a mat. And these 4 friends, they hear that Jesus is in town, and they're like, "We need to bring our friend to Jesus to be healed." And so if you read the passage, they take him, they carry him to the house, and the house is too full. And they're like, "We can't get to Jesus." So they climb up on the roof of the house, and they somehow get their friend who's on a stretcher on the house, right? They probably bring up some rope, they open up a hole, right? And Jesus is probably there, like, preaching and teaching, and, like, stuff starts falling down, right? Like, on his head, like, what's going on? And then they lower their friend down in front of Jesus from the ceiling. And very specifically what the passage says is that when Jesus looked up, and you can imagine the 4 friends just, like, looking through this hole in the ceiling, their friend on the ground, he's like, "Sorry, like, I have no choice, I'm paralyzed," right? His friend lowered down, and these friends like looking in this hole, and it says when Jesus saw their faith, when he saw the friend's faith, he looked at the person on the ground and he says, your sins are forgiven. So when Jesus looked at the faith of the friends that, of this one person, upon that, he forgave the sins of this one man, and he even healed his body afterwards. And what starts off as Paul's faith in God, Paul's faith in, that what God says he will do, right, and who God is, he will provide, it covers those around him. And then it starts to grow. We'll explain that in a little bit. Another point I want to make is faith in God transcends circumstances. They're on the 14th night of a storm where they have not seen daylight, they have not seen stars, they have not seen the moon. Paul is so confident that they are going to reach land soon, that they are going to be saved, that he takes bread, right? He breaks it and he gives thanks to God in the midst of the circumstance where everything would point towards death, towards destruction, towards loss. And Paul's faith transcends the circumstance. And he says, and he's thankful. He breaks bread and gives thanks to God. Other people don't have the same faith, right? When he goes to the island and the snake bites him, people see a circumstance. People see, oh man, a snake bit him. This guy must be a murderer. This guy must have done something really bad for karma or justice to kind of come and get him the way that it does. And Paul he just shakes it off, like it's not even a thing to him. And Paul's faith transcends his circumstance. And lastly, last point I want to make is that faith in God expresses itself through actions that reflect our trust in God's character. There are so many groups of people in this passage, many who don't know who God is, right? When Paul declares his faith, he says, this is the God whom I serve. He's not declaring it to people who are Christians. He's declaring it to people who are not believers. This is the God whom I serve. And yet people start seeing his faith, his kind of infectious faith, and they start believing in it too. Right? When the sailors try to escape, he tells the centurions, hey, if they escape, we're going to die. Right? We all need to stay together. The centurions now, who didn't listen to him before, right, when they told the boat to keep going, they listened to him. They're like, no, they cut the sailboat off. Right? They don't let the sailors leave. They're expressing an action of faith. It's a huge thing. That's probably their last lifeboat because they already dropped another one previously. Right? He encourages them to eat, and they all eat. After they eat, they throw the rest of the food overboard to lighten the ship. That means that they are starting to believe that what Paul is saying is true. Right? They wouldn't throw the food overboard if they were like, I think we might be stuck here for a few more days. Like, that's a pretty bold move. That's a pretty bold expression of faith. When they hit the sandbar, the centurions and the soldiers, they want to kill the prisoners. The Roman law is that if a prisoner escapes from you, and you're the soldier watching over them, then you get the sentence that the prisoner would have gotten. So it's always better in certain situations like this to just kill the prisoners so that you save your own skin. And they're afraid because if one prisoner leaves, they're the ones in charge. They're the ones that are going to get killed. They're the ones that are going to get sentenced. And the centurions, though wanting to save Paul's life, they take another step of faith and they say, don't kill the prisoners. In so many ways, they put their life on the line for a trust in something that they have no idea. Right? They have no relationship with God previous to this. And maybe it is like leftover faith, it's like, well, we're screwed, might as well just like take a chance on this, like they're in a bad situation, they've tried a couple of other things, they didn't work, and like, okay, well, might as well just try whatever this Paul guy is saying. And maybe that's kind of lame, it's like lame leftover faith, but God is so awesome that he's like, I'm going to show you what happens when you put even little faith, lame faith in me. Right? I am that awesome, I am that good. The weak faith that you have, the last resort faith that you are giving me, I am going to bless. And everybody takes a step of faith, whether they're believers, whether they're non-believers. And at the end of it, God blesses. And at the end of it, God provides. And he provides in a lot of different ways for the sailors, for the prisoners, for the soldiers. He provides them life. For the villagers on the island, he provides them healing. For Paul, doesn't provide him freedom, he provides him the opportunity to continue on the journey that God has given him. It's just this amazing picture of how God interacts when people place faith in him. So I have some application for us. Oh, I don't have it up there, but I'll tell you. One, hang around people that have great faith. These are people that you want to be around. People have a strong, deep faith in God, in his sovereignty, in his goodness, in his mercy, in his forgiveness, in his truth. These are people that you want to be around. These are people that, when you might be bogged down by circumstances, when you don't have that faith to see or hear or know what God is doing, that they will support you, they will bolster you, they will point you, right? And they will, in faith, guide you in your life, walk with you in your life. You want to be around these people because as we see, as we've seen, God even works in the faith of those around us. I would also encourage you not just to hang around people with a great faith, but consider having great faith for the people around you. Sometimes I know amen. Sometimes we easily look at the people around us, look at their situations, sometimes judge their own personalities, and we lose faith. Right? We lose faith in people, we lose faith in their circumstance and how things are going to turn out for them. Now I want to challenge you. Our faith is not in people, actually. It's not in circumstances. It is in the God. And a God who is in control and in plan. And circumstances will look one way. And there is always a call to faith, a call to trust in who God is. It doesn't mean everything just turns out peachy keen. But it does mean that we get the opportunity and that in faith God will continue his plan. Another application is that kind of related to that is let's center our faith on God, not on results. If you have become so stuck on any particular single goals in your life that we place faith in achieving that or faith in getting there, that may not necessarily be what God has in store. And God transcends circumstance, he transcends our plan, he transcends our path. And we need times where we step back and we're like, no, God, my faith is in you. Right? In the goodness that will come from you, in the plan that comes from you, in the path that comes from you, in the direction that comes from you. So maybe some of us, we need to kind of step back a little bit, recenter. And lastly, take steps. You know, even these people who have no relationship with God, they take steps of faith. They place, maybe they have no choice, but they place life on the line. They place trust. They place their livelihood. They do stuff. They cut the boat off, right? They throw the grain overboard. They don't kill the prisoners. They actually do things that expresses their faith. And this is why James says, I believe, right? Faith without deeds is dead. If our faith has no action, you really do ask the question of, well, what's the quality of my faith? So take steps. Take bold steps with your faith. The steps that we're meant to take, I don't think will just come, there's not a one-step-fits-all. I think they come specific to us. I think they come specific to our situation, where we are at in life, the relationships we have in life. And it takes, I want to say, community to discern that. It takes prayer to discern that. So come to silence and solitude, right? It takes community to discern that. So engage, right, in conversation and relationship with each other. And then stuff will come out. I can promise you. Have faith in that, right? Have faith in that when we take steps towards God, right, he reveals. He's not some, puzzle maker waiting for you to, solve something. He wants us to know what he has for us. And I hope that we can take a page, that God is calling us to a deeper faith. Now let me pray for us. Father God, Lord, we know that it's so easy in our own hearts, Lord, to lose trust in you. It's so hard to forget who you are, or maybe not even seek to know who you are. Lord, but I also do know that, Lord, even with the small faith that we might have, even if it's leftover faith from trying everything else and your last resort, and that you are so good that you honor, you hear that, Lord, and you respond to it. And God, I pray, Lord, that we would gain faith, Lord, that you would increase it in your will, Lord, as we take steps towards you. God, I pray, Lord, that you would raise up in this congregation, in this group of people, people with great faith who will stand for others, Lord, when their faith is low. Lord, that you would build a church here, that you would build your community here. Lord, that can care for each other, that can hold each other, that can trust in you for each other. We thank you that you hear that you respond to it. And so we pray all of these things